Well, Professor Carter, Secretary Carter, Dr. Carter, so many titles. We really want to thank you for joining our class today. It was wonderful when you were down the hall at CSAC just weeks before your nomination as our 25th U.S. Secretary of Defense. It was Stanford's loss when you went off to Washington, but it was certainly the country's gain. As you know, Raj Shah and I, we both had the privilege of working with you in various capacities, and just can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me, Joe. And let me just take the opportunity to say how much I think the country is fortunate to have both you and Raj working on these problems. Stanford University is lucky to have you, but the United States of America is lucky to have you. You both served with great distinction, and I and everybody who knows what you did, very grateful for it.
Well, can't thank you for all your leadership, Dr. Carter. I'm going to change all your titles. We'll go with Secretary Carter. But Secretary, we've shared your extraordinary bio with our students, so we can jump right into some questions, both from Raj and I, and some from the students that they have ready. But pending any more comments from you, Secretary Carter, we'll jump right in.
No, jump right in.
Okay. Secretary, you served in so many critical roles at the Department of Defense. When I first met you in the fall of '97 at the Harvard Kennedy School, you just finished your Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy tour, and later you served as Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology Logistics, our Deputy Secretary of Defense, and certainly as our 25th Secretary of Defense. But Secretary, you are a medieval studies major or dual majored in physics out of Yale. It's not the typical background for a senior Department of Defense official. Could you let us know what inspired you to serve initially and then continue to serve at the highest levels in our Department of Defense?
Yeah, it's worth telling the story because it's not so distinctive to me actually, and it's very relevant to students. So it's a good story to tell. How did I get into this business in the first place? You're right, Joe. I was one of those right brain, left brain people who was interested in both history, in my case, medieval history, because I thought it was one of the ways you understand how the world works is to understand how it came to be the way it is. And I thought that was interesting. But another way you learn how the world is through physics or science. And so my other love, the other side of my brain, was science. And that's what I ultimately got my doctorate in. And I was happily doing theoretical elementary particle physics. By the way, one of my great mentors was Sidney Drell, now passed away, but a great leader there at your own institution. Sid was my external thesis examiner in quantum field theory. And that's what I did. And I was happily doing that. And Sid and some other people, including the guy who designed the first thermonuclear weapon, which was not a bomb, it used liquid hydrogen and deuterium rather than a solid version, which we do now in the primaries of bombs. But at any rate, it blew up an island. And he and Edward Teller and a few other people who were great Manhattan Project era type figures had come to me and said, you need to go to Washington for just 1 year and work on a particular technology problem that was salient at the time, had to do with a big missile, peak of the Cold War, the MX missile, 10 warhead missile. And I went there. I didn't really want to, but I did. And here's what snagged me and convinced me to stay working in the department and for the department. And that was this, that I was present when big consequential decisions were made. And number one, and number two, what I knew mattered, made a difference in how those decisions came out. So think about it, you're 25 years old and you go home at night, you say, today I worked on something that really matters and my knowledge, my participation made a difference. What more could you want as a young person? And so that felt really compelling to me. And so then I worked for Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense to Ronald Reagan. Then I worked for Paul Nitze, the great Cold Warrior, who was President Reagan's negotiator with the Soviet Union. And then I had another experience which was important, which is those two guys and Sidney Drell and people like your very own Bill Perry and Brent Scowcroft, who died recently but was National Security Advisor to both President Ford and President Bush 1. Jim Schlesinger, who was the Secretary of Defense. They all took the time to help me and advise me along the way. And that meant a great deal to me too, that the people north of me seemed to be very honorable people, and they helped coach me along. And so I tell all this story, Joe, because I think if your students are trying to decide where they go in life, it matters if you go somewhere where important things are happening and what you know how to do shapes those important decisions. That's the first ingredient. And the other really important ingredient is that you associate yourself with admirable people. And I was lucky to have admirable people to associate myself. So that's how I got in. That's how I stayed in it. That's now the early 1980s. My first Pentagon job was, I guess, January of 80 or 81. And it was not a very high level job, believe me, when I started. I was just very low level. In fact, I was upset when it was on a snow day, I was sent home because I was so insulted that I wasn't considered an essential employee. But anyway, you're right. I climbed my way up to Assistant Secretary, Undersecretary, Deputy Secretary, and ultimately Secretary of Defense. And obviously, I love the Department of Defense very much and love this country very much and love, moreover, what this country stands for, which is bigger than this country.
Thank you, Secretary Carter. Raj, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a wonderful introduction there. So, sir, back in 2001, you wrote one of the seminal papers, prescient with Marcel Lettre, on the coming technological revolutions, and in particular, the need to engage the commercial sector across disciplines. Yet it took you becoming Secretary of Defense nearly 15 years later for the Pentagon to embrace that move to commercial innovation. Given all your roles, can you describe what is the process of change and reform in the building? What does it take, and what were your secrets or insights to make that change happen?
Well, that took too long. You're no question about it, Raj. And since you were one of the people at the point of the spear in finally getting things of great consequence done in forging a relationship between the commercial technology base and the military technology base, you'll know that very well. And yeah, we did have those ideas because 15 years ago, 20 years ago now, because it was clear then, as it is now abundantly clear now, that whereas the technology, in order to be the greatest military in the world, we need the best technology. And when I started out in the Pentagon, 1980, everything that mattered came out of the Pentagon, or at least out of the government, out of the space program. So, for example, I worked on GPS in the early days. There was no competition. There was no civilian guy working on GPS. There was no Chinese or Indian or Russian guy working on GPS. We were it. Well, the Russians were actually, but that's another matter. And so everything we needed, we grew in our own building to first order approximation. But it was becoming clear, certainly by the end of the 1990s, but even when I was Assistant Secretary of Defense, when I oversaw the export control system was one of my responsibilities, that the commercial sector was overwhelming the military sector in terms of the sheer volume of R&D being done. And that if we were going to stay the greatest technological power, we couldn't just use what we grew in-house. We needed to use what was out there in the commercial and increasingly global technology world. And the only way to do that was to have bridges between us and them. But a lot of those bridges had either been burned down or had just fallen down over the decades since I started in 1980, when they were very strong. And so we embarked on rebuilding them, Raj, and the Defense Innovation Unit was one of those bridges. And you made it a bridge that is now sort of 6 lanes of back and forth. And that's just one of the things I did as Secretary of Defense. There was the Defense Digital Service, the Defense Innovation Board, the Strategic Capabilities Office. These were creations that I designed because they stood for this necessity of having bridges. And I thought if with you and DIUX, I could say, see, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having some of our guys out in Silicon Valley and in Austin and in Boston, actually interacting with, having an outpost of the Pentagon in the tech world. It stood for something as well as being something.
Yeah, thank you for that. And inside the building, there were certainly detractors, both in the building as probably as on the Hill.
Sure.
Maybe talk us through, your lessons learned as a successful reformer of the bureaucracy. What are the things you did that worked?
Well, obviously, as you get bigger and bigger positions, there's less and less negotiation you have to do. So when I was undersecretary, for example, I had to, win over my bosses to the proposition, which turned out to be easy. I had sensible predecessors as Secretary of Defense, and they backed me up when I needed it and let me do my thing when they didn't need to be involved, and I was lucky in that regard. And within the building, by the time I became Secretary of Defense, as you know, because occasionally you would ask me for help, and I could throw a lightning bolt from the front office, and that would be the end of it. But the reason that new things require protection is that they're threatening to people who might be very wonderful people, but are doing things the way they're doing them and feel that the existence of a new way is a threat to them. Now, the best way you overcome that as a leader is not by crushing people, but by convincing them that this is necessary, and preferably getting them to be partners in this enterprise. And so when many in the traditional defense industry came to realize that this could be good for them, it could help them modernize, they dropped their opposition, on top of which they knew they'd anger me. But Raj, you know, and Joe, you know also, that when we succeed in interesting a new young company in doing defense work, we increase the possibility that that small company will continue to work on defense work, thereby strengthening our country, and might even do subcontract work or be bought by a defense contractor, in which case it'll be good for our traditional defense contractors also. So, and then there's Congress, and they're always in Congress. Policy is one thing, money is another. And Congress is of the view that in the Constitution, they spend the money. And so there are a lot of staff on the Hill that are quite conservative about when the executive branch creates new ways of spending money. And they needed to be convinced also. But I have to say, I think because I had wonderful people like you who made these things successful and who communicated very well, the opposition was overcomable. I think the more challenging to us was not ourselves. More challenging was winning over people in the tech sector who were very skeptical, and of course who included people who were Edward Snowden fans, which I'm not, and so forth. And and so you had to recognize that many of these people did not have a good association of technology with the government, and you had to win them over, and that would take some time. But when you're in public life and you're trying to do things, you have to work on people. So we had to work on the Congress, we had to work on the tech sector, but most of the Pentagon, once I got involved, not only most of the Pentagon, all of the Pentagon, that was fine. And I'm happy to say that since I left, both my successors as Secretary of Defense, but also, and very importantly, all the defense leadership have done the same thing because they recognize that's important to them. So the Air Force, the Army, they've all created new things in the last 5-6 years also to help them connect directly with the tech sector. So I think a lot of people voted with their feet and recognize that this is a good thing to do, and in their own way are creating their own bridges.
Yeah, it's an excellent foundation now, and it's partly why this class and these students, are so excited about thinking about defense problems. If we were to look forward, Secretary Carter, what are the next big innovations or reforms that you would recommend that the department pursue?
Well, let me take on the substantive side first, and then we'll take the institutional side. But on the substantive side, there are a number of frontiers where if we don't work very hard, we're not going to be what Lyndon Johnson used to say, the firstest with the mostest in technology. And I think America's defense ought to be the firstest with the mostest. Let me give you some examples. In the digital technology area, that's a very fast-moving field. It is a largely commercially driven field, and if we do not have an ambitious presence in that field, we will find that the Chinese PLA or others are able to garner military advantage by superior use of digital technology. We can't let that happen. I'm not saying that all AI is necessary for defense, and of course the Chinese will be better at dictatorship than we will be, but that's not something that I'm looking forward to getting good at as America. But in areas where we really want to compete with them, I want to make sure we win as a military. Another thing worth saying in this regard is that the digital revolution is what people first think of when they think of tech. But I live here in Boston, which is just as importantly a biosciences hub. And I don't think that there's as much attention to the fact that the revolution to come is the biosciences revolution. It will be as consequential as the digital revolution in the last 20 years, including a lot of platforms that can be exploited very inexpensively by people who are not technically deep, which is what we've done with digital technology, right? I mean, a lot of people who use digital technology have no idea how it works and had nothing to do with creating it. That's not true in biotechnology yet, but it will be soon. That'll have consequences for national security. And I want to be the firstest for the mostest there. I think that gets a lot less attention than the digital revolution. And I could go on with outer space and so forth. So in almost every field of technology, material science, as I said, space technology and so forth, it's important for us to be hypersonics, so forth, for us to be the firstest with the mostest. There's one other thing, though, that I think I should mention, which is I think that the concept of war is changed also by technology, and the concept of victory. Let me give you an example. By one reasonable definition, we are already at war with some other countries. And in the sense that they are actively trying to undermine us. And it's not even too extreme to say, in a certain manner of speaking, we have even been attacked by other countries. And I think it takes a certain ability to think ahead in technology to realize the ways that warfare will change and the concept of strife and the concept of victory will change. And I think we need to make progress in that area mentally at the same time that we're making progress in being the best technically.
Secretary, that those topics, this understanding the concept of war and victory is different, are topics we're going to hit in our course. And thanks for teaming us up for that. So I'm going to shift focus a little bit, Secretary Carter. But I remember as your research assistant back in the mid '90s.
A very good one, by the way.
Well, thank you, Secretary Carter. It inspired me to do so much more later. But I was working with you on the Preventive Defense Project initiatives, and you really had a focus on China. At that time, we had this great hope that, as China's economy grew, it would become more integrated and become a responsible stakeholder, playing by the rules. I remember Dean Joe Nye and others at the time were worrying that, if you treat China like an enemy, it's going to become one. So we had these high hopes in the 90s. But, fast forward to today, maybe when the last administration came on board and had to develop a national security strategy, that strategy, the national defense strategy that followed it acknowledged that we are in an era of great power competition.
Yeah.
So the question, Secretary Carter, is this an accurate characterization?
Yeah. No, I think it is. I think if you go back to, say, the 1990s, I think many in the strategic community in the United States hoped that China would turn out different. Now, I was one of those, but I stopped hoping that on around 2000. And I certainly had stopped hoping that by the time I became undersecretary in 2009. That's why we started the B-21 bomber. That's why we were doing the whole rebalance business. So in defense, at least, even though at the same time I was obviously focused as the acquisition executive on Iraq and Afghanistan, which is the other end of the spectrum. You have to do everything. I had already concluded that China was not going to become what we hoped they might. In other words, somebody who kind of joined the club, the existing club, and played by the existing rules, which are not so bad, by the way. The Enlightenment, political values of the Enlightenment that are in our Constitution, not so bad, and most of the constitutions of our trading partners, not so bad. Free trade, not so bad. But they didn't. They became and remained a communist dictatorship. And so that's the way it turned out. And now I'm not saying that leads to war necessarily, but it certainly means that I think anybody who doesn't realize that by this point is really out of date. And I'm glad to see that our colleagues in the Defense Department have certainly built that realization in over the last 5 and 10 years to the department. That's necessary. It's different from a Cold War, Joe, because, and here's the difference, during the Cold War, and that's where we were when I started, right? And we had a communist dictatorship called the Soviet Union, and we had a lot of differences with them. And the issue of whose system was going to prevail was being discussed. But we didn't trade with the Soviet Union. We built a wall around the Soviet Union, an economic wall. They didn't get anything. It was a big deal when Pepsi-Cola was allowed to sell Pepsi in Russia. That's not what we do with China. So all the while they have been making decisions about their political future and their geopolitical future that were not the ones that were hoped for in the 1990s, all that while we have been trading with them. And they've been getting richer. We've enjoyed buying their stuff and trading with them. They've been using our technology and so forth, but none of that was true in the Cold War. So this is truly a different situation and requires a very different policy approach from the Cold War. Now, people who talk about a new Cold War with China are either misremembering what the real Cold War was like or don't understand China, or both.
Secretary, given that we're in this long-term competition, and you anticipated this before many, how should we prepare our military and thus the military technologies we develop to compete most effectively?
A couple of things. I mean, first of all, in the technology area, they are a increasingly technologically sophisticated military, and we need to recognize that. When we first started to interact with them in the 80s and 90s, they were really so backward that Americans would come back from visiting Chinese military installations emphasizing how backward they were. That is not the impression you'd get today if you visited a Chinese military facility. They're doing very well. Now, I'm not one of these people who thinks they're about to surpass us, Joe, and I'll tell you why. For starters, we continue to spend a lot more than they do, so that by that crude measure of inputs, we're still the big dog. Moreover, we have been spending more than them for decades, which means our accumulated capital stock of military equipment is much larger. Third, we remain, I think, still a much more innovative society than they are, which means that we have a lot more military innovative potential than they do, if only we'll use it. Next, we have an officer corps that is very combat experienced. because we've been at war for 20 years, and our people know what they're doing, and Chinese officers are less experienced. And then last, and very importantly, we have all the friends, and they don't have any. At least if we stop treating our friends badly, we'll have friends.
Thank you, Secretary Carter. Raj.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone that we've all worked with closely in the past, former SASC staff director Chris Brose, has recently wrote a compelling book called Kill Chain. And in it, he says the real problem around defense innovation and reform is not money or lack of talent or lack of capable or committed people in the government, the military, or the private industry, but the real problem, to quote, is a lack of imagination. And so, do you believe that our military planners and leaders have an adequate level of imagination about what the future of war might look like? And are there specific gaps that you think our students in this course may want to consider in their projects?
I know the author. I don't know the book specifically. If I understand the quotation right, though, it sounds sensible to me. It certainly is not the case that we lack talented people, or we lack dedicated people, or that we lack enough money, really. None of those can be used as excuses. I think by imagination, perhaps what is being referred to is what I talked about earlier when I was saying that sometimes we don't realize that we're being attacked when we're being attacked. And maybe imagination is the right word there, or recognition. But I think in matters of warfare in a fast-moving technological world, you have to really be very mentally agile. And you can never underestimate the ingenuity of your opponent. Look, even in the case, when I was doing counter-IED as Undersecretary in Afghanistan, you're fighting against Taliban who have fertilizer bombs. Now you say to yourself, can't the United States of America defeat that? Well, that was damn hard. They were clever. They were clever. And every time we thought of something, they thought of something. And so don't underestimate an enemy. And I think that if you're the prevailing military power and you've been around for a long time, you have to really watch your back and make sure that you have not let your own success give you blind spots, that your less self-satisfied opponent won't have. So if that's the kind of thing that is being gotten at here, I think that's important about the nature of conflict. And I certainly would encourage your students to be thinking about that aspect as it's what are we applying technology to, and not just are we applying technology well.
Yep, well said. Not just the technology. Over to you, Joe.
Secretary, just on your efforts in Afghanistan in 2010 as Undersecretary, I mean, the fact that you were able to push the bureaucracy and get those MRAPs deployed just saved a lot of lives, and people that I'm certain people I knew, but thank you for that. So Secretary Carter, this in the previous century.
Hey Joe, can I say something based on that? First of all, thank you for saying that. But it can be no other way. When you're in the department and we have people fighting, that's what you wake up to every morning and go to sleep to every night. And yeah, I was worried about the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians and the North Koreans and so forth. But all the time I had responsibility, we had people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and that creates a drive in you. And again, that's what I would wake up to every morning and go to bed to I wake up to those people and their families. And that was a great motivator for us to do better. Yes, it preoccupied us a little bit, and you can say, would we be further along in working on high-end stuff if we hadn't had 20 years of war? Maybe. I'm not sure. I always thought that we could walk and chew gum at the same time, but we spent a lot of time fighting those wars and trying to do well at those wars. And I don't apologize for a single minute of it, of the managerial time I spent doing that. It can be no other way when you have, kids who can get killed by your orders or according to your orders.
So I just remember that coming across loud and clear when you were with General Petraeus in Kabul in those really dark days. And I'm sure that Arlington Cemetery's got a bit more room thanks to your efforts. So thank you.
Well, appreciate you saying that.
A somewhat lighter topic, Secretary Carter, in last century, the defense innovation largely occurred in government labs, and our best engineers, coming out of Stanford and Harvard and MIT and others, they work for the DoD and other government agencies. That's where the good problems were, where the good innovation was occurring. But now this innovation, it's occurring in the commercial technology base, and it's driven by consumer demand, not government requirements. And now our top students, like at Stanford and I'm sure at Harvard, well, they're flocking to Google, Facebook, Palantir, other private companies. So the question is, how can we create opportunities and incentives and even inspiration for our top engineers, computer scientists, and other disciplines to serve and contribute to our national security, but both in the government and maybe even alternative options?
Yeah, there were two things going on in parallel in the intervening period. Those people went away and worked for. What they actually did, Joe, was they went away and worked for the big advanced companies, which worked for the Defense Department. So Xerox Research Park, where did they get all the money to do their advanced stuff? They got it from the Defense Department. So people were, but they weren't necessarily joining the Defense Department, but they were joining the defense industry, because the defense industry was the biggest part of industry and the high-tech areas at that time. And so it was the exciting place to be. Now, we're still exciting and we're still big, but we're not the huge chunk that we were back then. And what that means is that a lot of people graduate from Stanford or Harvard or MIT. I'm associated with Harvard and MIT. Used to be with Stanford, love Stanford, all great places. They would graduate and they'd end up somewhere that had some connection to the DoD if they were in high tech. Today, you can go out and never have any contact with DoD. And so we have to create that contact on the DoD side. You can't undo the march of time. It is what it is. So those days are never going to come back. But I think my experience was that when we recruited somebody to spend part of their career or part of their life, maybe all of their life, working on our problems in a technologically oriented company, that they would go home at night feeling a lot better about what they did all day than somebody who spent all day selling advertising. I mean, it is being part of the country's security, any part of public life, I think, is a noble thing to do. And it's really nice to do something that is bigger than yourself, that's bigger than money. And, you can't tell yourself, it's to say you're changing the world when you're selling advertising is kind of childish. I think that, you have to look at what the real purpose, your purpose is. And if you're technologists, like many people out there, and certainly like myself, I wanted to apply my knowledge and the great wonders of technology to something that really mattered. Now, defense isn't the only thing that matters, and government isn't the only thing that matters. But certainly without security, we can have nothing else that's good in life. And so security is a pretty important objective.
Thank you, Secretary Carter. Secretary, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to try to get to a couple of our student submitted questions.
Great.
And I have a question from Myrno Menon, who's a graduate student, or he's at the GSB, our business school here, graduating this year. Also a veteran of our Hacking for Defense Innovation course, which
good.
we're familiar with. But his question is, Secretary Carter, you played a pivotal role in pushing the DoD to reach out to Silicon Valley and engage with startups and early ventures who are working on key technologies. 6 years later, the DoD has invested heavily in pitch days, competitions, et cetera, but still struggles to turn these innovative ideas into capabilities. What are the major hurdles that remain, and how do we overcome them?
Well, it's a really good question, and I absolutely accept the premise. Just being here doesn't magically make everything work. It's still hard work. And a very important task for us in defense, it's not me anymore, but my successors in defense, is how do you create the impedance match between us and the tech sector? And that means changing us in some ways so that we are a better customer. We're more rewarding to work with just as a business proposition. That we're not as stodgy, that we don't make you have to be like us. You don't have to look like me to be associated with national defense. I used to go out and try to recruit people who had, earrings and orange hair and all that stuff, and that's fine with me. I want to defend the country. You have to be flexible, and you have to meet people halfway. And above all, we have to change the way we do business. That's all on us. And so you can evangelize all you want. And Raj was very successful in getting people interested in us, but he was also successful in getting us to change the way we engaged with them so that they were more than just tourists who visited us, but they actually did things of substance for us. But there's still a lot more work to be done there. So I think the premise of your questioner is right on. There's still a lot of work, and I'm happy that the department has done what it's done so far, but I remain ambitious. And were I there, I would be doing more. I think, for example, that we haven't finished yet creating all the new parts that we need to the Defense Department. If you think about right after the launch of Sputnik in 1958, the country said to itself, we got to really watch out. These Russians are pretty good. And so the government went into high energy mode to make itself more innovative. That is when NASA was created. That is when DARPA was created. That is when the NRO was created, which we didn't used to be able to, we couldn't even talk about when I started in defense. Makes the reconnaissance satellites. All those things were created in the sudden recognition that we needed to do things differently to win. And I believe that today it remains that we need to do things differently to win. DIUX is like one of those new creations after Sputnik. But the things we need these days, like DIUX, are different. They reflect our current times. The things that were founded after Sputnik were basically, they fit in the old system. They were to spend government money on government projects. This challenge today, as your discussion has elicited, is much more one of linking the government to the commercial global technology base. Different Same objective, different game.
Thank you, Secretary. Secretary, I think we have time for one more student question. And this comes from Foster Carman, who's an undergraduate senior in graduating this year. And his question is, what are the top, well, he says top three, but the time I will ask you, what are the top defense priorities that the next administration, Democrat or Republican, should adopt to ensure that the U.S. is prepared for the challenges posed by near-peer competition? So kind of a softball, big there, Secretary Carter, if you could maybe go with that to end.
Well, let's walk around the world just geographically, because unfortunately, it's not a small number. We have China, we have Russia, Iran, North Korea, terrorism. They're the biggies. And since I've spoken geographically, they are unlikely to be replaced soon by anything else but those five. But the domains in which they challenge us will change. It's worth noting that we have to protect ourselves against many potential enemies. Most of them are focused only on us. So the PLA, it's all about America. The Russians, all about America. The Iranians, all about America. For us, on our team, we have to spread our bets. And that makes it more difficult. And when people ask me, why is the Defense Department so large? Why do we? One of the answers I give is, I'm not going to justify every dollar we get, obviously, because we don't use every dollar we get as well as we should. But it's also true that we have a unusual role in the world. A positive role if we play it, of being a leader, but we certainly have more enemies than anybody else does.
Thank you. Secretary, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it here, but I just want to thank you on behalf of our class, really for your extraordinary service to our nation and beyond. Raj and I can thank you personally for the inspiration and mentorship you've given us, and we know many thousands more really owe you a similar debt of gratitude. But I think we would all agree that our military is stronger and our country is safer, thanks to your legacy, and it all continues to have an impact on. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for saying that, and ditto, and hello to a place that's I have a great fondness for, Stanford University.
We hope you get out here again soon, Secretary Carter, and thank you again for your time.
Bye-bye, guys.